So good morning and welcome to the first of two-part CLIDE Awards Showcase webinar series that COG is sponsoring this year to celebrate the 2021 CLIDE Award winners that were awarded in June of this year. I am Tamara Cook, Senior Program Manager at the North Central Texas Council of Governments, and I will be your moderator and host this morning. So this morning, we are going to be celebrating Leadership and Development Excellence, or CLIDE for short, awards that were provided in June of this year to 9 local governments and partners to feature really great projects in our region that really espouse the goals of the Center of Development Excellence. And this showcase today provides a great opportunity for the region to learn more about these award-winning projects and include presentations from the city of Richardson, Fort Worth, Dallas, and Arlington. But before we get started with the program, I'd like to spend a few minutes providing some background on the Center of Development Excellence, the CLIDE Award Program, and the Principles of Development Excellence. So I'm very happy to announce that several months ago in January, we launched a new website for the Center of Development Excellence. We tried to bring it into the 21st century and refresh it and provide a platform for us to launch some new initiatives and resources for our region centered around development excellence. The Center of Development Excellence is a program of the North Central Texas Council of Governments, and it's existed since about 2001. And in this year, as I just mentioned, we launched this new website. So about 20 years after the initial launch. And it really is meant to serve as a regional hub of resources that support sustainable and efficient growth in North Texas. And this is just a screenshot that you see of the homepage when you go to the new website. I'll also spend a few minutes at the end of the presentations today covering the details and the menu items up there at the top. Okay, but today we are here to celebrate celebrating Leadership and Development Excellence Awards Program, or CLIDE for short, because that's a mouthful. And we are here to celebrate 4 projects that were winners this past year, and we are very happy to have them here to present with us. That program was created in 2003 to encourage innovative development projects and practices that will help accommodate the expected growth and ensure a sustainable North Texas for generations to come. And the CLIDE Awards Program does this by recognizing private and public development programs and projects that exemplify the principles of development excellence. And since the inception of the CLIDE Awards Program in 2003, we've had 114 projects in the region that have won a CLIDE Award. So that is definitely something to be celebrated over the lifespan of this CLIDE Award Program. This is a map you can see on the slide of that is on the Center of Development Excellence website, where you can go back in time all the way to 2003 and see all of the winners of CLIDE Awards and have a snapshot. When you click on these little icons here, you get a snapshot of what the project was with links that are available as well. So it's a great resource to see what has been funded in the region with actually a really good corresponding map of where they actually are in the region. So the CLIDE Awards are selected by a distinguished panel of national jurors, and the 2021 projects and programs exemplify the principles of development excellence, which outline a vision for sustainable and livable communities in North Texas. And these are the principles of development excellence that are shown on the screen now. So we do have 12 principles, and to be considered for a CLIDE Award, as I just stated, a project that's submitted must exemplify one or more of these 12 principles of development excellence and must receive a unanimous vote from our jury of nationally recognized experts in urban planning, architecture, land development, and public policy. And so these principles of development excellence really reflect our region's collective values as affirmed by the North Central Texas Council of Governments Executive Board. They range from development diversity and efficient growth to healthy communities and effective implementation, things that we all are striving to bring to our communities and our region. There are 5 categories of CLIDE Awards, including new development, redevelopment, special development, public planning and policy, and raising public awareness. And today you're going to hear several presentations that won the Public Planning and Policy Award and one presentation that won the Raising Public Awareness Award. So with no further ado, I'm going to go ahead and make sure that we've got plenty of time for the presentations and jump into our first presenter, who is the Collins Arapahoe Transit Oriented Development and Innovation District Form-Based Code. And that is going to be presented by Keith Crum and Doug McDonald from the city of Richardson. And they won a Public Policy and Planning Award this past year. So Doug and Keith, I'm going to turn it over to you. Just please let me know when you want me to go to the next slide.
For those of you who don't know, the city of Richardson is a first-ring suburb just north of Dallas and south of Plano Road. We're about 26 square miles, and as of the census data that was released a couple weeks ago, we are just under 120,000 people. Next slide. Back when we did our comprehensive plan update in 2009, there were certain areas that we looked at that really needed further study. There were about 6 of those enhancement areas. We've gone through these Arapahoe Collins, which becomes the Collins Arapahoe area, is our 4th of those enhancement areas. Next slide. The area is about 1,200 acres just east of Central Expressway and the Dart Arapahoe Station. It's home to about 1,000 businesses with about 19,000 employees. 2 nearby educational institutions include the Richland campus for Dallas College, as well as the UTD campus, which is actually located in Richardson. This area is perfect for startups as it has a bit of affordability and very strong technological infrastructure. Next slide. Back in 2017, our first step was the Chamber Task Force through our Chamber of Commerce, which looked at the area and identified zoning barriers, which is really significant considering that a lot of the zoning that was put in place has been there since the 1970s. They also identified public and private sector investment opportunities, as well as recommended the exploration of an actual innovation district. The next step was in 2018, where we did a vision study and strategies looking at the land use, transportation, open space, as well as a market analysis. This led to a developed unified vision and was part of a very large public engagement effort. Next slide. As I said, the vision study was completed in 2018 with an overall vision for the district. I looked at study goals, the baseline analysis, as I mentioned previously, and the strategy focused on 10 main strategies. And this came through a substantial consensus through broad support from within the city, the chamber, and as well as stakeholders in the public. Next slide. So the overall vision is for the district to be the premier tech hub in Texas. Next slide. Okay, one more slide. And through this, back one, please. Sorry. So the district is looking to continue to be a center for innovation and entrepreneurship, visually unique, green and lively and active, walkable and bikeable, and we'll utilize the station area, which is on the western side of the district, as a primary gateway. Next slide. The main strategies, we had 10 of those pretty much all are in progress, and Doug will get into a little bit more of that later on. But what we're talking about today, it has been completed, and that is the zoning that was done at the end of 2019. I'll go ahead and pass it on to Doug.
Alrighty, so the next slide. So this is, as you see, the kind of building on the initial task force recommendations, the vision study created in 2018. 2019, the city did a city-initiated rezoning of the entire 1,200-acre district, really trying to align the zoning with the vision study and essentially code the vision. We launched a lot of demonstration projects. We worked with the Better Block Foundation on doing a kind of tactical urbanism activation of a creek area. We also did one on Greenville Avenue bike lanes, bringing in, doing the road diet, bringing in bicycle facilities. We got a grant from AARP to do that testing, as well as a grant from Blue Zones to actually implement the road diet permanently. So that has been implemented today. It is the longest protected bike lane in North Texas. It ranges all the way from up to Campbell Road down to our downtown area near Beltline Road. So it is our first physically separated facility in the city of Richardson. We also did a lot of public engagement. A lot of it really kind of built around these demonstration projects. And then we started doing a lot of planning for mobility and capital improvements for helping the city kind of lay the groundwork for private sector investment to follow. Next slide. So the overview for the zoning initiative really was trying to establish that strategy for the area to implement the vision that was created in 2018 with the work of the public, with our stakeholders and the city council, creating different standards for 4 unique areas. We actually split the entire 1,200 acres into 4 different distinct areas, and having those zoning really trying to look at the building setbacks, envelope, height, use, architecture, signage. This is a really unique project I've ever worked on in terms of a zoning project, where we actually deregulated a lot of the regulations that were in there from the 1970s and 1980s, taking out a lot of the building height restrictions, taking out a lot of the parking requirements. We started looking at the properties of the district, and these buildings right here represent some of the building stock we have in the district, and it looks vacant, and that's because we have required too much parking in the past. We've overbuilt our roads. And then we have 4 lease signs that are on every single corner of these buildings, but it's actually a pretty healthy district with about 7% vacancy rate. But our built form has really created this vacancy look throughout the district. So we really try to take a step back and deregulate a lot of the area and the district, with the exception of the Arapahoe Center Station, which I'm going to talk about a little bit, which we really tried to bring a lot more form at the station area and try to build a mixed-use development right at that station for POD. Next slide. So this is the project schedule. We kicked off in March with our consultants. We did a lot of work with our city council and city planning commission, which is our planning and zoning commission. A lot of stakeholder interviews, again, kind of walking them through the process each step as we get to another milestone. We got to city council. We did a kind of a joint workshop with our council and public and city planning commission. We then had to work a little bit with some refinements. Our task force, as you remember from Keith's discussion in 2017, which really kicked off this process. We went back to them at the very end because they wanted to see some additional restrictions kind of loosened. We tried to kind of find some middle ground where we thought we could actually loosen some of the areas, especially in our employment sub-district, which is a lot of the industrial manufacturing area. We went to city council again for public hearings, had a number of public hearings in city council. At the end of city council, we had unanimous approval. Everyone came and spoke in support of it. So it's a really great process for us to get that to the finish line. Next slide. Again, we built a lot of work on our extensive public outreach and stakeholder input, building on the vision work we did in 2018, a lot of stakeholder input, a lot of work with our mayor and city council. These 2 pictures to the right actually is one of our tactical urbanism project we did with Better Block, where we brought in a lot of activity to a vacant, kind of actually a storm channel, and activated that with some amenities and trails. We've actually now built a trail that goes through this creek area. The building on the right of this, on the left of this photo is actually the building I'm going to be talking about in a little bit that we're reactivating now with the city of Richardson and with the UT Dallas centers to actually have that as a new innovation quarter, our innovation district headquarters. So it's really kind of a 2-phase. We've now come in and taken a look at this as a vacant building, a vacant underutilized storm channel, and now I've activated both in the IQ as a really kind of catalyst for a portion of our areas. And then again, a lot of workshops, a lot of briefings with the council, a lot of work with our task force. Next slide. they're all our direction from our city planning commission, our council. As we began, we kind of had a vision setting with our council and city planning commission. We're at the very beginning on what are your goals with this rezoning. We tried to accomplish each one of them. I believe we did at the end in December. Removing barriers and increase the flexibility to maximize the development potential on each property and each site. Limiting the creation of non-conforming uses. So this is really unique, especially planners start looking in our codes and realize we have portions of this zoning area that allow for manufacturing and allow for multifamily. So it's a very broad range of uses in some of these areas, but that was intentional because we were trying to let the market drive when that change is going to happen. Because this 1,200 acres is primarily office, warehouse, manufacturing space. There's 7.5 million square feet of flex space in this area, one story. So we want to try to protect some of the affordability of the space because that's really what is great for this innovation, for these small businesses, for startups. But we also wanted to allow some of the market to kind of take place and have that change occur in areas, very specific areas that we wanted to target. So when you look at the code, you'll see really a kind of broad range because we didn't want to create non-conforming uses if the market wasn't ready for that change to occur. We started trying to emphasize Duck Creek as a really great amenity. Working with the Arapahoe Center Station really is that key catalyst and kind of front door to the Innovation District. You're going to hear a little bit more about the work we've done now to even progress that beyond this zoning in 2019. Trying to find areas where residential is appropriate, but still trying to protect the integrity and the affordability of that one-story flex space that is so critical for smaller businesses and for startups. Using residential adjacency approach for residents around the area, and it really, again, another unique characteristic of this is that we're trying to provide a more walkable, bikeable district, but we also have to accommodate trucks and freight because this is primarily still a warehouse manufacturing area. So there's key streets where we've identified road diets and bicycle facilities, but there's also key streets that we've identified wider lanes to allow the combination of these trucks and for loading and deliveries. The photo on the right is actually one of our other demonstration projects we did with Better Block Foundation, where we came in, painted bike lanes along the corridor. We came also and did a at-grade crosswalk. At the Arapahoe Center right now, you actually have to cross under the street. We built an underground tunnel to basically hide all the pedestrians down below the road to get to the other side of the parking lot. We've now brought that up to the street, made it a lot safer with the road diet to slow down the traffic. And now it's really great to see all the pedestrian traffic moving to and from the light rail station to a site that is going to be redeveloped in the near future at the Arapahoe Center Station. Next slide. We've rezoned the area I mentioned into 4 different sub-districts. These are the 4 sub-districts. The employment sub-district really is the majority of this. This is an area we really want to try to protect the affordability and scalability of that one-story flex space. The other 3 areas is where we see some potential for some changing, some introduction of some residential uses in the near future around the station area at Greenville Avenue and Duck Creek. Next slide. Each one of these districts has a regulating plan. They set the parameters for future development. They set different streetscapes and street state standards, heights, building setbacks, build 2 lines, all come into play with the new regulating plans, the uses being by right and by special permit. And then basically anything's not listed in the use chart is prohibited. Next slide. So I'm going to walk through really quick these 4 different sub-districts. The employment sub-district being the first one. Again, this is about 740 acres, so it's the majority of the 1,200 acre district. But the intent really is to promote this for the Center for Business Innovation, for entrepreneurship, to support existing businesses, having a wider range of uses. So in areas where we do, as Keith mentioned, it was industrial, manufacturing, warehouse, pretty plain in terms of the use chart. We've now tried to integrate more retail uses, more restaurant uses, to allow a lot more flexibility, allow a lot more ability for new businesses to come in, increasing the flexibility in building height envelope, height restrictions. We had really restrict height requirements in our older codes. We've now, for the majority of the 1,200 acres, there's not height restrictions because we're going to let the market drive that in terms of height restrictions. There's not any residential areas inside the 1,200 acres besides 2 apartment complexes, so that really went to our benefit about really kind of deregulating and allow the market to kind of drive what we want to see in this area. And then by special permit, only adaptive reuse. So again, I mentioned kind of protecting the integrity of that one-story flex space. If a development were to come in and they were to use existing building shell but convert it into a lived work use or bringing in some residential component into it, we allow that now by special permit on a case-by-case basis in that 740 acres. Next slide. The Greenville Avenue area, this is an area just north of the Arapahoe Center Station. It's basically a continuation of that kind of mixed-use walkable area along Greenville Avenue. Again, having a wider range of uses, we incentivize in the zoning actually going denser and taller for residential uses if you incorporate some sort of retail, restaurant, non-residential use component. Even if it's a retail-ready component where the market's not there yet, but we want you to build it in, it allows you to go higher, bigger in terms of density, supporting existing businesses, having, again, a lot more flexibility in the building envelope. And then a lot more residential uses actually being allowed by right in this area. This area is also adjacent and right across the street from a mixed-use development called Eastside. So there's already that kind of changing happening over on the west side of Greenville Avenue. So this just continues in on the east side of Greenville Avenue. So now you have the kind of same type of use and height restrictions and requirements on both sides of that main corridor. Next slide. The Duck Creek area, again, this is an area that we really came in and did an activation with the Better Block Foundation. Now we've actually installed a trail and some amenities along this corridor. So in this area, we really tried to allow kind of two entrances to the district and to the buildings, one from the creek area, one from the street. So allowing a lot more signage, a lot more murals, especially along the creek side, allowing a lot more flexibility in the signage in general, limiting outside storage and new surface parking along the creek. And so again, trying to have essentially a new front door to the businesses fronting the creek area itself. And then this area also has some allowances for some live work to come in if it were to use the existing footprint of the existing building. Next slide. And lastly is the station area. Again, this is kind of the dense, walkable front door to the IQ. This is the area that we see complete transformation happening from the existing land uses that are there, because the existing land uses there are primarily auto uses, auto storage, auto sales, and then a very large 14-acre parking lot for DART. And so this was an area that we really see an opportunity for us to really come in, be very strategic in what we want to see coming in here. There's some regulations on having some additional uses on Greenville Avenue, but this area one is where we actually did create 4 non-conforming uses with the new code, and those were all auto-related uses, primarily being auto sales and surface parking lot, auto storage. And then next slide. We've also done some additional work with the station area with the AECOM, coming back in and doing some small area planning, working with DART to figure out how we can reconfigure that the bus transit facility and actually integrate it into the overall TOD. This area, we actually have minimum densities for residential uses. We require retail ready when the residential is fronting Greenville Avenue, again, that key corridor within the IQ. No minimum parking requirements for residential uses if it's a mixed-use development. So basically, if you have a mixed-use development with residential and non-residential at the station area, we don't require any minimum parking requirements for the residential component. We only require it for the non-residential component. We know that residential is going to be parked. Again, we're trying to take a step back and let the market drive what the parking is going to be needed for that development. But in a sense, this was a big discussion with our council, but a big, I think, accomplishment for us to really start trying to get out of the parking game and letting the developers in the market kind of drive that in the future. There's also no minimum building height restrictions in the station area. Next slide. This is just some kind of before and after photos. Actually, now we've taken out the regulations, allowing more flexibility in signage, allowing more flexibility in building materials, more address signing. We had regulations that you can't have really tall address signing, and we said take that out. Now there's really cool address signing coming in. It's a 1002 North Central Expressway. Taking out height requirements, so now we have new buildings coming in that actually would exceed the height requirements if the old code was in place. So just kind of a great before and after, even since our code adoption at the end of 2019, with 2020, we know what happened then. So we're still, again, starting to see some changes in the new code. Next slide. And I'm going to finish off real quick. Again, 2020, we kicked off a new name. So this area is now called the Richardson Innovation Corridor, or the IQ. So we don't have that really long Collins Arapahoe TOD Innovation District name. A lot of key negotiation kicked off, kind of capital improvements kicked off with some trails, bike facilities, new launching of studies, and also a networking series we have called IQ Brew. We also have a bond coming up in November of this year. We have a lot of projects in the bond that are in the Richardson IQ area. We kicked off a lot of the planning for some rebuilds already in the IQ, where we're actually going to be doing some road diets and putting in some bicycle facilities. Actually, our first raised bicycle lane will be going in along Greenville Avenue, along Glenville Drive. Expanding the boundaries of our TIF district to allow more flexibility in terms of financing and funding. Some key studies. We have a Smart Cities Toolkit that's under the work right now with AECOM, looking at how we can, as we start rebuilding streets and rebuilding this district, what do we need to start putting in the ground to kind of really help us electrify and ready for the environment for new technology and in the future. We have an ILA that was approved by the DART board and by our city council. Big accomplishment. We worked for yet a year and a half on, where essentially the land at the DART property is now being leased to the city of Richardson. The city of Richardson is now going to go out and sublease it to the master developer. So in a sense, we're acting as an agent of DART to get a master developer to come in and really meet the requirements and the vision that we see, but also meeting the requirements of what DART needs in terms of facilities, access for the bus facility, and for parking. But that's a big chance, a big accomplishment for us to be able to kind of control that development at the Rapos Station and be a really great partner with DART. And lastly, we announced a really big announcement with UT Dallas to reactivate a building in our innovation district. My office will get moved out to this new building along with the University of Texas at Dallas, which will be bringing 5 new research centers in this facility, as well as bringing a portion of their venture development center. And so it's a great kind of catalyst, a great anchor for the district to really start promoting innovation, networking, collaboration, and entrepreneurship and startups support. Next slide. That's what I have for you. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak here. I know Keith and I really appreciate the opportunity. Tamara, happy to answer any questions now or wait to the end.
Okay, great. Thank you, Doug and Keith. I think we'll hold until the end to make sure that we've got time for everyone to make it through their slides. So thank you. My one comment real quickly is I was excited to see some green roofs on some of the future concepts of the station footprint. So that was exciting. So great job. And I like the rebranding. It's way shorter. So, okay, so our next presenter, our next CLIDE Award is also a Public Policy and Planning Award category winner. And it is for the South Main Urban Village, another long name, Revitalization through Complete Street Reconstruction and Private Development. And we have today with us Eric Flatiger, Patrick Buckley, and Mike Brennan. And Eric and Patrick are with the City of Fort Worth, and Mike is with Near Southside Inc. So I'm going to turn it over to Eric, and I will change the slides for you all.
Okay, thank you, Tamara. I'm actually going to hand it over to Mike Brennan. He's going to kick us off to start this presentation.
All right. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Tamara. Thanks, everybody. This is a pleasure to be presenting the South Main Urban Village and the South Main Reconstruction Project as a CLIDE Award winner. This is something that has been in the works for a long time, and I'll kick things off with just a little bit of background. This slide shows the partnership that allowed this transformation to happen. So today, represented in our group, we have myself with Near Southside Inc. We've got Eric and Pat with the City of Fort Worth. This is an honor to be presenting with this COG produced event. COG has played an essential role in making this happen, and we'll tell you more about that. And of course, the county was also a partner here. Next slide, I'll orient everybody to the Near South Side geographically and a little bit of background. So as the name implies, the Near South Side is near downtown Fort Worth, just south of it. I-30 is our northern boundary, and it's about a 2 square mile area that is the city's original streetcar suburb, and it was developed in the early part of the 20th century. It has evolved over time, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But this map shows you that the area is really a collection of sub-districts, some of them urban village in character, and we'll talk about South Main Village and Magnolia Village, but it's also home to the city's medical district, and really 2 medical districts, one located at the western side of the district and the other where the public hospital is in the southeast corner of our district. All of these areas connected, integrated through a street network that is still in place from those days when we were building highly walkable city centers. We still benefit from that street grid, and that's a key part of our urban design vision. The next slide shows what I refer to as the heyday of the Near South Side. This is actually a photo from 1939. And even in this photo tells a lot. It talks about the fundamental urban design principles that shaped the neighborhood's original development. So you have these mixed-use buildings. This is at the corner of Hemp Hill and Magnolia, looking south on Hemp Hill. And you can see on the right side of the photo, two mixed-use buildings, ground floor, locally owned businesses, their storefronts, residential uses above. If you look closely at the street, obviously this is a street that accommodates on-street parking to serve those businesses. You have some pedestrians on the sidewalk. The street environment, the public realm environment is, closely integrated with the function of that ground floor of those buildings. But you can see if you look in the roadway there, the streetcar tracks are still visible south of Magnolia, but the area of the street closest to us, those streetcar tracks have already been ripped out. And you could see that the transformation from a transit-oriented development pattern to one that was auto-oriented is underway, even before the Second World War. The next slide shows you the conditions that really dominated our area for a lot of those decades following the Second World War, as a lot of the investment went to the next generation of neighborhoods just further south. And we had an exodus of population, fortunately, because it was still an economic center. We still had an employment base, so that there were still a lot of people visiting the near south side. There were a lot of great old buildings that remained intact. They might have been converted to warehouse uses. Some of them were left vacant but mothballed. And the next slide shows you the transformation that came about, just as one example, with one of our most notable historic landmarks, the Max Mell building at the corner of Magnolia and Henderson. And the next slide shows how that building, which you'll see in the right side of the frame there, on Magnolia, that building, in combination with a treatment of the street, with streetscape enhancements, the historic buildings restored and filled with locally owned businesses, and new development following that same set of development principles or design principles through application of a form-based code. Those were the ingredients for success, with our original focus really on Magnolia Avenue and the Magnolia Village area. And the next slide will show you how that success was recognized by the APA by designation of Magnolia as a great place in America. So that was the focus early on. Our attention then turned, and a lot of this was sort of parallel attention, but then turned to the South Main Village area. And I like to show this street before we talk about the details of actually getting the project together, all of the complexities of funding and design and construction and so forth. Like a lot of what we do on the near south side, and similar to what Doug was talking about in the previous CLIDE winning presentation, a better block, sort of grassroots, tactical urbanism approach was what kicked off our South Main efforts. This is October of 2010 at our Arts Goggle Art and Music Festival in South Main Village. If you just take a quick glance at this photo, you think, hey, this is a cool context-sensitive design segment of a street. If you look closely, you see that the bike lanes peter out, and the design of the installation of those bike lanes wasn't too precise. It looks like they had to repaint one of the sides there. The stencil is not quite on center, but the impact of that better block project done in the middle of the night with not a whole lot of sanction from the city, but one season later, the entire street was restriped, and we spent the next roughly 5 years working toward the implementation of a complete street reconstruction. And Eric is going to walk us through how that project came together, all the partners and the funding, and then we'll hear from Pat about the design and construction.
Thanks, Mike. I'm going to share a little bit of information, sort of setting the stage historically regarding the Urban Village Development Program. As Mike showed on one of his earlier slides, South Main Urban Village is in the near south side, as is the Magnolia Urban Village. There are actually 16 urban villages, and recently we've actually included an additional 17th urban village in the city of Fort Worth, all primarily within Loop 820 area. And they really result from an effort that dates back to the early 2000s, when the city created a commercial corridors task force and created a significant study analyzing the economic circumstances, essentially the loss of sort of jobs and opportunities that had been occurring in those formerly very vibrant commercial districts supporting lively neighborhoods. Really, the effort began to focus on revitalizing these older commercial districts that had essentially been bypassed by the expansion of the city outward during its suburbanization sprawl, if you will. Master plans have been adopted by the city council for most of these urban villages. So I'll tell you a little bit more about that with the next slide. Tamara. The city promotes the success of urban villages by applying mixed-use zoning, including, in the case of South Main Urban Village, using form-based codes to permit and encourage and support high-density, pedestrian-oriented development consistent with the community's vision. And again, master plans have been created for most of these locations. Economic development is a significant piece of this. We have something called the Neighborhood Empowerment Zones program in the city of Fort Worth, the goal of which is to, in part, to level the playing field, to make the redevelopment projects that come forward, as closely as possible, as profitable as greenfield development out at the very edge of the city. In addition to economic incentives, which include fee waivers, city lien releases, tax abatements, Chapter 380 agreements, facade improvement grants, and so forth. Also, the city is creating capital improvement projects that upgrade the infrastructure, that create high quality public spaces. And the South Main project is an example of that. Tamara, next slide. So this is the project site, and as you recall from Mike's presentation, I-35W is to the east, I-30 is to the north, along with downtown, and importantly, the TexRail and TRE passenger rail stations are essentially just north of the I-30 alignment that you see. So very walkable. The elements to the project, which range along South Main from Magnolia to Vickery Boulevard in the north, include fully reconstructing the roadway, which was in pretty bad shape prior to this project, include installing wider and enhanced sidewalks, pedestrian lighting, street furniture, including benches, trash receptacles, and in this case, public art in this project. Street trees planted approximately 30-foot intervals, on-street parking with bulb outs, of course, to make the parking safer, and also shorten the crossing distance for pedestrian, which is key. Upgraded water, sewer, stormwater infrastructure, relocated franchise utilities, and new infrastructure supports walkable urban density. And what we mean is that the outdated water and sewer infrastructure was not intended to support the kind of density that the form-based code actually permits in this area, and that we are actually actively encouraging with the help of Mike's team. So we needed to upsize some of that infrastructure in order to accommodate that density. So just a little bit about the project benefits. Again, the infrastructure was upgraded significantly from a poor street to antiquated water sewer infrastructure that was really not sized for the kind of density that we wanted to be able to accommodate, to create a much safer, for pedestrians primarily, context-sensitive, complete street with the design really focused on supporting all users of the street. So it created sort of pedestrian focused district and much more appealing, much more, supporting vitality, supporting businesses that want to be in a, sort of high use, walkable, pedestrian kind of environment. So really the goal is, as is the case with all of these urban village projects, is to support economic vitality. And in this case, lots of great old buildings, but to bring them back through adaptive reuse to develop new buildings at higher densities, and really to support the sort of a revolution in terms of the economic vitality of the place. As Mike noted, we've got a lot of partners on this project, which help to leverage the city's investment. We'll go over that in a sec. So the benefits also include, from the city's standpoint, increased tax revenue generation. So that's what this slide is depicting. Property value changes between 2006 and 2019. So essentially before the project began and then after it was completed, with the values, as you can see, rising in the urban village itself, which is the dark line that you see on the map. From 8.5 million to over 218 million, so a gain of 2,439%, which is very significant in that short of a time span. And then if you look at the second buffer that's shown there, with a smaller increase during that time period of 253%, which includes a lot of significant development that had existed previous to the start of this project. Still, the dynamic changes pretty dramatic in terms of tax revenue generation, including the quarter mile buffers, brought it up from the 2006 values to 2019 being $785 million. So very significant economic impacts, very significant impacts to the city's bottom line. So on a return on investment perspective, this is a very successful project. We had a lot of partners, and their logos are shown here. Insticog was a key partner, stepped up to the table with a $3 million Sustainable Development Program grant, which we couldn't have done the project without. The tax increment financing district for the near south side, which Mike's group is actively engaged in, put up 2.7 million plus, which included a little bit of a tip Insticog loan. And then the city brought to the table almost $2 million through infrastructure departments. Tarrant County supported it with $740,000 that permitted a swap in terms of older earmark funds. So the budget was 8.3, ended up being a little bit more than that, but again, very successful project. So Pat's going to talk a little bit about the construction.
Okay. Good morning. Dunaway and Associates were our engineer for the project, and as Mike had said, everything had been around for a long time. So we had to look at the utilities being upgraded, as well as coming up with a design that we felt comfortable with on the pedestrians, trying to match up all the existing buildings. So we ended up putting in a lot of things, and as we started building the project, we reached out to the design, all the partners in the project, and tried to contact all the adjacent property owners and ask them to be sure and come to us so that we could make sure that their water needs were met. And even though we did a lot of coaxing and stuff, it's kind of like they don't come out of the woodwork until we start construction. So we ended up getting a lot of people coming in and saying, oh, you're building something, we need to make sure that we have a certain amount of water provided. So we had to do a lot of working with different property owners along the edge to make sure that we match up to their doorways, but we also needed to make sure that they had water and sewer needs met. So we created a mess, but it was all worth it. We tried to keep the traffic open and tried to work with all our property owners along the way. And you can kind of see as the development as it stands now has totally changed. So there was a lot of work to be done, and I think some of the results are be on the next slide. So you can see what during construction, the buildings are what they look like, and then after construction, and if you'll go out there take a look at it right now, it's even better all the time. So next slide. We had, so basically we were reconstructing the road. We were trying to make sidewalk improvements. We added pedestrian lighting. We had the utility upgrades, as I said, and we had landscape enhancements. Another nice piece that I believe the city of Fort Worth does a good job on is trying to get our public art installed to our different projects. They add a really nice touch to our projects. All the utility improvements, like we said, we had storm, water, sanitary sewer, and I'm glad that a lot of those property owners came to us during construction, because the demands of the waters for these older buildings has really increased based on their new proposed uses. We had to provide a parking lane. We provided a 5-foot bike lane, and then we were reducing to the 11-foot travel lanes in each direction, so that we could make sure that we had all the multimodal transportation needs met. The bike lanes added a lot to our project, as well as the furniture that we provided, the benches, and the public art makes it a very walkable community. Yeah. Yes, thank you. We also tried to make accessible curb ramps, reclaim the brick intersection. We have the 10-foot wide crosswalks. So it's makes for the property to really look upgraded. So this was the concept that we provided to all the stakeholders in the neighborhood, and that was ended up being pretty much as pictured. The people are totally on the coming out into the area after we got all the construction done. Mike, I think you wanted to go and talk about this.
Yeah, I'll just wrap up real fast. As past previous slides showed the extent of the project, obviously $8.5 million capital project with all those complexities. We weren't assured that all of the other ingredients would come together. And what has been just the most rewarding part of this is that street reconstruction has been one of the ingredients, and all the other ones have also come together. So the buildings, the historic buildings, have been restored. They've ended up in the hands of sensitive owners that not only have restored those buildings, but they have filled those buildings, often working in partnership with our organization and others, with locally owned businesses. Those local businesses are a competitive advantage for the near South Side. It's why people want to spend time down here, is there are so many cool places to go that you don't find in other sections of the region. What we didn't expect is that same level of energy would not be limited just to South Main Street. It would extend to Bryan Avenue, which you see on this slide, which was formerly just an alley. The same set of ingredients. We rebuilt the street in partnership with the city, put in some sidewalks, some streetscape enhancements. Those buildings were restored. And even Crawford Street, which was a completely new extension of a street that dead-ended in the middle of the urban village. Now it's lined with hundreds of residential units and this nice linear park that we call the Skinny. So we'll end it here, and we'll be available for questions at the end. But thanks so much for the opportunity to present the South Main story.
Great, thank you, Eric, Mike, and Pat. That was a great presentation. I haven't seen the Skinny. I'll have to get over there and visit that. Okay, so I'm gonna just click on through here, and we are going to move into the third presentation. another award category winner for the Public Policy and Planning category. And Susan Alvarez with the City of Dallas is going to talk about the Comprehensive Environmental Climate Action Plan, or CCAP for short. She is a very dynamic speaker, and I'm going to turn it over to her now. Thank you, Sue.
Oh no, the pressure. So I really appreciate your consideration and actually the award, but I also love participating in this type of a panel, if you will, because I get all kinds of fantastic ideas from other cities that I can reappropriate. And so I can only hope that maybe some of the stuff we're doing, I can have a similar impact on my neighbors in some of the other cities that are here today. So anyway, go ahead and click into So normally I have a really nice slide with the National Climate Assessment view of what's going to happen here in North Texas relative to climate change. That said, all of the pictures on this slide come from Dallas within the last 5 years. So you've got going from drought to ongoing flooding back in 2015. We have an air pollution watch day like today. We have the June really scary straight line wind event. We have tornadoes. And then, of course, Snowmageddon this spring back in February. And so a weird and changing climate is here. It's not just polar bears. And so with that, we've had a little gentle encouragement from Mother Nature to continue with our work related to our climate plan. Next slide. So one of the first things when we went out into the community to start talking about our climate plan, a lot of our business organizations very strongly suggested that we provide a business case for climate planning in North Texas. And so we did a little bit of rooting around, and I want to share some of those because it's not just polar bears in the Arctic. It's not just snow and ice. There are very real economic impacts as well. Next slide. So this is some information that Tamara provided, and it was one of the first things that we found, and that is the return on investment for monies expended towards making our communities more resilient. And as you can see, this was a multi-year effort by multiple agencies, and it's a pretty good return on investment. Next slide. The other thing is this is not a Delta map. This is billion-dollar plus climate disasters, no less deadly. And Texas is number one. We've had, I think at this point, it's $136 billion plus weather disasters in the last 40 years. And we lead in the top 10 of all 8 categories where they count billion-dollar disasters, including the frozen precipitation type events. Next slide. This is that same data, though it's in a bar chart and sequentially. And as you can see, there's a very clear trend towards more of these events and more money being spent cleaning up. The green one is where most of our storms in North Texas come from. It's our straight line wind events, tornadoes, etc. So there's definitely, we're spending money cleaning up. And so that supports maybe some preventative action. Next slide, please. And then one of the other things is we had a gentleman on our task force to develop this plan that works at the U.S. Federal Reserve Bank in Dallas. And he provided a white paper that their macroeconomists had done showing that business as usual can result in a fairly significant drop in our GDP by the year 2100, even if we meet the best case scenario in RCP 2.6, we'll still see a little bit of a drop. And it's just because the impacts are real. Next slide, please. One of the first things that I did when I got into the department is respond to an inquiry from our controllers who had an inquiry from Moody's, who underwrites all our municipal bonds, on not if we were doing anything for climate, but what. And so we're third behind New York and San Francisco. The $3.16 billion that is showing up is mostly from Dallas water utilities doing work to secure water supply over at least the next 100 years. One of the things that's really interesting, though, is there was something on Business Wire last week, and Moody's has acquired a firm that does environmental and climate risk modeling. And so I don't think this is the beginning of investors looking at what people are doing to limit the risk to their investments. So that's, to me, a huge waving red flag that we need to be doing something to address climate right here in Dallas. Next slide. So we started with a greenhouse gas emissions and inventory, and that's typically a good way to go. It makes us have a science-based plan, no surprises. 98% of our emissions in Dallas are around buildings and energy and transportation, and that's generally really good news because that's stuff that we can control. Next slide. So this plan was adopted a little bit over a year ago. And Mayor Johnson has really supported both the implementation and the development of this program. And a lot of it, when you get down to it, is stuff that we as a city should be doing anyway to make sure that we're ensuring effective municipal services and a good quality of life for our residents. Next slide. So one of the things that makes our plan a little bit different is, in addition to looking at mitigation, which is reducing the emissions that are driving climate change, or adaptation, which is managing the risk. Do we make our infrastructure more robust? We started looking around, and the things that you would do for mitigation and adaptation are really expensive. And so we started looking at nature-based solutions and what can we do that makes Dallas a cleaner, greener, nicer city to live in. And what do you know? There's benefits relative to the other primary climate tools. At the center of our program and every single one of the actions in our plan is environmental justice and equity. And that's because internationally, we have found that those communities that are the least able to deal with the impacts of a changing climate are those that are impacted the most. That's communities of color, folks that maybe have not as many economic advantages, elders and children's. Next slide, please. So we've got a plan largely built through a lot of outreach with our businesses, our community members, our neighborhoods. And like everything else, one of the things we were told is we don't want a plan that sits on the shelf and nobody does anything. So we want targets, we want metrics, we want to measure, we want to hold your feet to the fire. So in each one of the 8 areas that we've adopted into the plan, we have numeric targets. And so we have a way of measuring success over time. Next slide. So this is one of those partridge in a pear tree kind of things. We've got 97 actions in 8 areas. We looked at those primary benefits relative to mitigation, adaptation, environmental quality, and environmental justice. And then we started from about 400 different actions that we identified through reviewing existing plans and benchmarking against other cities. And that was going to be unwieldy. So we started looking at co-benefits. Can we create jobs? Can we reduce poverty? Can we effectively reduce our greenhouse gas emissions? How do we promote environmental stewards? And so what we started doing was screening those actions, the 400 actions, through co-benefits, or how do we get the most bang for the buck? And so we ended up with 97, which is still a whole lot of work. But I think we're on a good track moving forward. Next slide. So the first one is buildings, and that's really the easiest for us to get our arms around. This is a photograph of our most recent library that was constructed under our green building code, which requires LEED. But what we're finding is that the architects are taking things a little bit farther. They're building to the Architecture 2030 program, which is really focusing more towards net zero. And so this library has nice curved walls that deflect straight line winds. You can't really tell because this was a construction photo and it's still kind of scrubby, but the site has native vegetation and green infrastructure. There's continuous insulation in those walls for energy efficiency. And then up above that lovely curved rooftop with the solar tinted windows is about 180 solar panels that are helping to power this building. So this is the kind of thing that we're doing within our plan, and we hope to expand throughout the city. Next slide. Close in hand with our buildings is the energy sector. And Snowmageddon was a really good lessons learned there on how we really need to make sure that our energy grid is reliable and that we have some facilities that are more resilient to weird weather. Originally, we were more focused on summer heat. Snowmageddon was a gift, made us realize it's not just summer heat, but oh, by the way, we probably need to insulate our fire suppression systems because they can freeze and it makes a big mess when they unfreeze. So we're doing a lot of work with ourselves and others in this. This particular sector, our goals in this sector are really high. We're looking at 3,700 megawatts, which when I was talking to one of our colleagues in Encore indicated it's about 30 to 40% of the energy that Dallas uses. Conceivably in the future will come from solar sources. Next slide. Transportation, this is where we're working with our good friends at COG and our good friends at DART. I will say that recently COG enacted a resolution encouraging a 20% drop in single occupancy vehicle use. I believe this came out of some of the work we've done with air quality during the pandemic. Again, COVID in some ways was a gift because it let us know kind of where the real issues were. So that fits with the transportation options that we've got. We're also working with DART and many other partners to look at different ways of doing transportation in Dallas. And I kind of liked the skinny park and the street from Fort Worth because that's the kind of thing that we're wanting to do here in Dallas. Next slide, please. This is really interesting because we actually are sucking gas off of the McComas landfill and selling it as renewable gas. But when we went in the community and you talk about the environment, zero waste, recycling, composting is really, really high on a lot of people's values relative to managing waste. And so we have some goals. We're currently working to update our local solid waste management plan to kind of take things beyond recycling and maybe look at material reduction and some things like that, sustainable procurements in there. So we're kind of looking at revamping how we manage waste as a part of this plan, as a part of the normal local solid waste management planning efforts with our sanitation department. Next slide, please. Dallas Water Utilities is our perennial overachiever, and I don't know if anybody from that department is on, but when we reached out to see what they were doing, we found that they had already done their modeling with a future climate scenario relative to water requirements, and when they're looking at their water balance over time. And so a lot of the goals in the water sector come directly out of the Dallas Water Utilities plans, including the reused, looking at water quality, and looking overall at reducing greenhouse gas emissions and chemical use at their facilities. Next slide. One of the things that we found, and this is where that bottom circle comes into place. In our water sector, we've got about $2.6 billion in unmet drainage needs, and they're currently undergoing an inventory to assess condition of our drainage system and any additional needs. So we've got 2.6 billion in needs. We get 50 million every 5 years for gray infrastructure. Simple math, the areas of Dallas that are in a heat island, the areas of Dallas that have flooding issues and undersized aging infrastructure relative to drainage also have a pretty high degree of impervious cover. And so we started looking at impacts and potential for using increased green space, increased trees, increased vegetation and greening infrastructure, if you will, to reduce our reliance on the more expensive and likely not going to happen gray. And so we started looking at this particular sector as a way of mitigating our flood pulse in Dallas, as a way of improving air quality, and as a way of improving public health for our residents. And so this one is enormously important. We just passed our urban forest master plan, which I think will be really helpful moving forward towards implementing more green space. The photo on this is the Clyde Warren Park, which is a really good example of implementing green areas over areas that are formerly gray. We do have some other deck parks in the works, and I do like them for that piece. The other thing that they do is they knit together neighborhoods and provide a good public space for people to be outside. Again, another lesson from COVID. Next slide, please. One of the things that our neighbors were really worried about when we talked to them, Dallas has had an ongoing challenge with food deserts. Another gift from COVID was that we realized it's not just food deserts. We have a lot of families that are one paycheck away from a food line. And so we have a lot of food insecurity in Dallas. Yesterday in council approved a contract to develop a comprehensive food and urban ag program. I think that's going to be critically important moving forward, and there is a great deal of community interest in this particular sector of our climate plan. Next slide. So originally we did not have a goal 8 related to air quality. And the reason was that all of the goals in our plan should help improve air quality. But our neighbors were really concerned, and they insisted on it. And you know, we're in non-attainment right now for air quality. And last August, we got a letter saying that we were potentially in severe non-attainment for air quality. And so this is a big environmental challenge, and it is a public health challenge. So the goals in this relate to understanding our local air quality a little bit better, ongoing support for the COG Air North Texas program. And then one of the other things that has come up, and we're working with our planning and urban design group on it, is we've had several challenges recently with what I would call potentially inappropriate development, where we've got industrial land uses adjacent to neighborhoods. And so as a part of our update to the local comprehensive land use plan, we are taking a really good look at sites with environmental permitting to discharge, be it by stormwater or air quality, looking at our zoning relative to residential areas and other critical receptors such as schools and some things like that. This photo is a part of the Breathe Easy Dallas series of non-regulatory air quality sensors that we are installing. This is off of Pine Street. It's adjacent to a school where we have about 28% absenteeism pre-COVID related to asthma. And so we know that we have schools with their extremely high asthma rates. We're trying to understand right now what's going on in the environment near those schools. We're correlating this work with our Safe Routes to School program so that it's in neighborhoods where we know we've got kids walking to school. And we've got a couple of grants this year that we'll be implementing to kind of extend the reach of that air quality sensor network. Next slide, please. So again, no pretty plans that sit on the shelf. We're going to hold your feet to the fire. Our city manager put us on his Dallas 365 dashboard for measuring progress. And he indicated that he really wanted us to do the whole plan that first year. And so that caused a lot of consternation because it's a 30-year plan. So we said, sure, but can we do milestones instead of plan actions? And next slide. And so what we did, we worked with our task force, we worked with our city council committee. We've got a implementation plan for 2021. Right now we're at 48 actions, which is about half of the plan, with 136 identified milestones. We began the year with 15 city departments working with us. At this point, it's closer to 20 because we found that there's a little bit of FOMO and a lot of departments really want to help, and that is fabulous. We're excited about it. Next slide, please. And I will say that it looks like we're going to be pretty close to that 92% goal. There's a couple things that were a little delayed. But overall, our performance is good. If you want gnarly detail on this, here's our project website. Next slide. And like I said, there's a little bit of FOMO happening. When we went out to the departments this year, we had departments reaching out to us saying, hey, we're doing stuff. Can we get it into the CCAP plan? And even though this is kind of sort of a data management nightmare, for our staff members that are doing this, we certainly do not want to turn away departments that are actively pushing forward with the actions in this plan, and so it grew. Next slide. I think that I'm pretty close to the end. Oh, so this is interesting, and this is where COG can really help. When we did our first greenhouse gas inventory, we were so excited because we were showing that our municipal operations had dropped our emissions by about 68%, which is fabulous, except that in 2015, when we looked at it, we looked at the whole city of Dallas rather than just our operations. And our emissions are only about 2% of the city of Dallas. And then we started looking at population in Dallas versus the COG region. Go ahead and click the next slide. And we realized that we're only maybe about 25% of the emissions in North Texas. And so next slide. So we are currently working with COG on the, oh gosh, I can't remember the acronym, the RISE Coalition, which is a regional integration of sustainability efforts. We're doing a regional greenhouse gas inventory, and we're working together towards some regional opportunities to reduce our emissions, shore up our infrastructure, and improve our quality of life. Next slide, please. And with that, I'm open to questions, but I think we'll wait to the end.
Okay, thank you so much, Sue. Great job. I always learn something new when I listen to your presentation. Great. Okay, so last but not least, Bridget has patiently waited. We are going to hear from Dr. Bridget Gibson with the City of Arlington, and she's going to be talking about her Practical Creek Care, a handbook for stewardship, which won the Raising Public Awareness Award category for the CLIDE Awards. So Bridget, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, great. Tamara, I would turn my camera on, but I think I would get booted out. So I'm going to have to leave my camera off for the moment. And
no problem.
This presentation is really quick and really straightforward. So hopefully we'll still have a few minutes for questions at the end. And really what I'm going to talk about today is, the catalyst for our Creek Care Guide, what Arlington's environmental commitment is, and what we wanted residents to know, and talk a little bit about the guide and how we're going to define success. So this image here on the right-hand side is our first Creek Care Guide. It was published back in 1999. And so this was one reason why we decided that, okay, we need to go ahead and update our Creek Care Guide. It was 22 years old. I have the only hard copy that's remaining. So there was good information inside the guide, but it was outdated. And we just had a few tidbits of information on our website that were driving people to call us if they had questions. And so we noticed with COVID that we started seeing an increase in calls to the city from residents and from business owners about accumulated trash and debris on private property, on the creeks that are coming through their property, some erosion problems, even though erosion problems are not new to Arlington, but more calls from residents asking for the city to come out and fix erosion problems and things like that. And there's a little bit of a backstory here. It's not hugely interesting, but I think it was the major catalyst for me to go ahead and initiate the research in a newer Creek Care Guide. I started here in Arlington in 2009, and in 2010, we had a new stormwater engineer come on board, and one of the first things that she approached me with was doing a Creek Care Guide. And I said, "Oh, okay, yes, that's something that I'll put on the list." And then in 2011, she came back and said, "We need to do a Creek Care Guide." And I said the same thing. Yes, I'm very busy. I'll put it on the list. But she has done that every single year since 2011, asking for a Creek Care Guide. And of course, there were always issues with staff resources and things like that. But finally, when we produced the guide in 2021, I think it was just, part of it was to satisfy this person coming into my office every year for the last 10 years asking for a Creek Care Guide. And so this is what the Creek Care Guide looked like internally. It was black and white. It was about 18 pages. There were outdated graphics and word art. I just love the little, how we always put the little swirl on our word art back in the day. And it was really text heavy. And so we wanted to make sure that we had something that was very useful to our residents, and that wasn't heavy on the text. I am a visual learner, and I know that there are other visual learners out there, and a lot of times it's good to use images and graphics to kind of explain the point. And also part of the catalyst or the drivers to making sure that we have information available about environmental initiatives, water quality issues, and things like that, is that our city council has an interest in environmental policies and practices that will help us be more sustainable. And so city council publishes its priorities every year for us, and environment is always on the list, excuse me, or some derivation of that. And so we understand that as a municipality, we have a responsibility to protect our resources, but we also have a responsibility to educate our residents and business owners to be mindful of the things that they're doing out in the community. and to engage with our creek system responsibly in terms of their daily activities. And so really it's about making sure that our residents and our business owners are prepared and know what it means to be environmental stewards. And so there were a few things that we wanted residents and business owners to know in producing the Creek Care Guide. One, that creeks are vital and that it's critical that we care for them. And it's not only those individuals who are creek adjacent, but it's everyone in the city. Also, we wanted to make sure that, you know, residents and business owners knew that most of the creeks in the city limits are privately owned. So in that case, they had a responsibility to take care of the creeks that were flowing through their properties. And we also wanted them to know that taking care of creeks is really easier than they think. And so we wanted to outline some steps to creek care that they could take on their property. And of course, we wanted to outline the benefits of doing so, including minimizing pollution and preventing erosion and creating habitat for wildlife. And then finally, we wanted to include some important city contacts, which departments to call when they had questions about what was happening on their property, because as with every city, you know, different departments are doing different things. And so we wanted to make sure that they had the correct information to be able to reach out to certain departments. And so really, this is the cover of the new guide. And excuse me, this guide is full color. It's about 50 pages long. It's organized by content. It includes, you know, vibrant images for people who are visual learners. And it includes practical step-by-step advice. So it includes some do's and don'ts and things like that. And then also it includes information about, you know, watersheds and riparian systems that most people aren't really exposed to, but it's important for them to know. And we wanted to kind of push this handbook out in different phases. So one was to make sure that the publication was available on the city's website. And we also wanted to market it as a tool. So we pushed it to social media, or different social media outlets, including Facebook. Excuse me, we've done web articles and things like that. The third phase was to make print copies available to residents and businesses and to distribute those to local libraries. But we found that printing hard copies of this guide isn't really sustainable. The cost of using recycled paper and printing and things like that, it just was not cost effective. And so we are now going to leave this as an electronic resource, but we're in the process of having the handbook translated to Spanish and Vietnamese to cover our non-English speaking populations. And so this is just the contents page of the guide. And, you know, in respect of everyone's time, I won't have you click on the link, Tamara, to kind of flip through the book. But if you go to the city's website, arlingtontx.gov/stormwater, the guide is in our publications section in the environmental compliance section of our website. And so really how we want to define the success of the handbook is how many people are using it as a resource. Are we seeing change in the amount of calls that we're receiving from residents, or the amount of questions that we're getting from residents? And our ultimate hope, or our ultimate goal, is to kind of create a ripple effect, just to let our citizens and our business owners know that we're all interconnected. And so if they make positive changes in creek care, then others who are not creek adjacent will also see some of those changes. So we're all living in this watershed together. It's a shared resource, and really it's just essential for us to make sure that it's properly maintained. And that's it. And I'm ready for any questions.
Okay, great. Thank you, Bridget. All right, so that was a great diversity of projects and very exciting. And we are at noon. I'm going to quickly walk through just some very short final slides here. If you do have questions, since we are at noon right now, I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Please drop those in the chat now, and we can try and answer them via chat or verbally. I did also ask the speakers to drop their contact information in the chat so that if there are questions that you want to follow up with them on, you can certainly do that. So just really quickly walking through, I'm not seeing any questions right now, so I'm going to go ahead and walk through the remainder of these slides just so that you know where the presentations will be posted along with the recording. So as I talked about earlier, the Center of Development Excellence, we have relaunched a website, a new version of that website. It is this developmentexcellence.com. So if you go there, we will be posting this recording today and the slide deck with all the contact information on that website, and we'll send out a notice to our contact list that those have been posted. So please go visit that. Check out all the award winners from this year, those that you just heard from, and those from past years. Lots of great information to learn from there. On that website, there are also additional resources that I talked about earlier. We have case studies that we are starting to build out on a variety of different types of projects and sustainability projects, planning projects, construction projects, and we have a lot of other information like the North Texas 2050 and the Vision North Texas, for those of you who are familiar with those efforts from 10 or so years ago. Those are still very relevant today in guiding our efforts forward in terms of development in our region. We also launched an indicators website where we are attempting, I'll say there's so much data out there, so we are trying to coalesce as much as possible important points of data to measure where our region is using current data. And we have launched that within just the last few months, and we'll be updating it periodically with new indicators and new data as new data is released. So go visit that, see what you can find there, and let us know if you have any that you think would be good to add to that. And last but not least, we, for those of you who have been around for a while and are familiar with our efforts with Legos and looking at future development and growth in our region, we are still doing the Lego visioning exercises. We've done several already this year, and we are about to be launching a new tool, new visualization tool called Charm, and we are very excited about that. COVID has had quite a delay on that effort, but we are ready. And we'll be looking for communities in our region to host Charm workshops at. So more to come on that in the future. And with that, I'm going to do a quick scan. I don't see any questions. I don't see any hands raised. I want to thank our presenters so much for joining us today. I think these projects are great models for our region in terms of what sustainable and good development excellence looks like. So I appreciate your time today in attending and presenting. And I think with that, our webinar is concluded.